Welcome to Every Trait, the pro biopunk philosophy channel. You may call me CJ for now, and we are in phase 1, biology and pop culture. Today's episode is about Star Trek and its many flaws when it comes to the concept of owning oneself and the idea that the Federation is somehow post-bigotry, when it is in fact not. I'm going to tell you a story. This is fanfic. This is not a real event that happened in Star Trek. Imagine a village on a backwater planet in the middle of nowhere. There are scientists and engineers and artists of all different types, and doctors, and people in all sorts of advanced professions living there. And there are also retirees, people who are disabled, and so on and so forth. But this village has a quirk. Most of the people in it are modded. Biologically, genetically. A bunch of the retirees, the disabled, there was a super reactor problem, and so they had to mod themselves because machines would fry too fast in that radiation to basically become immune to it. And then they were able to solve the problem and therefore save it from destroying half the planet. Other people modded for more personal reasons. Maybe their instincts didn't match their form, or maybe they wanted to be closer to someone who was from a different planet or something. Some of them modded just to pursue their career. Maybe they were really interested in aquatic life, so they became aquatic, that sort of thing, so that they could stay down there for weeks at a time instead of having to constantly come back up. But this town has a problem. There are pirates who show up every now and then and demand tribute. One day, a Federation ship shows up, offers to help. Everyone in the village flees. They relocate to an even more backwater planet even further out. Why? As I understand it, mods in Star Trek are not permitted to do certain careers, especially more advanced ones, more sophisticated ones involving medicine and that sort of thing. I know for sure they're not allowed to join Starfleet unless they're vouched for by, an admiral, or there's some other special exception. There's a lot of exceptions, sure, but whenever you tell people as a whole that this group here is less than this other group, and it's okay to look down on this group, they tend to be oppressed. I wouldn't be surprised if mods in Star Trek, if one of them were, and they never even investigated who did it. I wouldn't be surprised. So I'm going to now introduce you to a term that I made up. I made up this term because there's no word for it. It's so common that there's no word for it. Think about it. If a planet was in eternal night, it was heated by an internal core, there was no sun, just distant stars. Would there be a word for nighttime? No, because it's all there is. Why would their language have a word for nighttime? So the term I want to tell you about is default supremacist. This is a double meaning. It is the type of supremacy most people have. Most people are this. It is the type most people are by default. It is also the belief that default people, non-modified people, are inherently superior, ethically, mentally, morally, to modified people. And it is something most people believe. And this is very common in the Federation. And to show you how hypocritical this is, what did Khan's people want? They wanted to put their own kind on top and have regular people be a lower caste. What did the Federation do in response? They put regular people on top and had modded people be a lower caste. They did the same thing. So it's a bit of a problem, especially for a sci-fi setting. Realistically, alien worlds would be far more alien than they're represented in Star Trek. You would not be able to survive there. You're not going to trip over an M-class planet on your way to another M-class planet. It's not going to happen. There might be other Earth-identical worlds out there, but we'll no doubt need stepping stone worlds to get there. And how do we do that? Terraforming ignores scale. Yeah, there's near infinite resources out there, but that doesn't mean they teleport into your back pocket ready to use. You're going to need to mod to survive on alien worlds. So a sci-fi setting about space travel that doesn't allow modding, oof. Now, to be fair, I'm going to give you some examples of writers that get it in the Star Trek setting. So in the Enterprise series, the one with Scott Bakula, there's a few things. There's a Denobulan race which they practice modding, gene modding, and they don't have any problems with it. It doesn't create a caste system. They don't try to force everyone to do it. They don't deny people doing it. It's free will. Everyone owns their own body. If they do spelunking, if they do like cave research, they might modify themselves to be able to climb really well or something like that, something utilitarian. But they don't force it on people. So it's not really what I called in an earlier video, FE. It's not really that. Because it's not being forced on anyone. It's just an individual choice. So, yeah, it's interesting. There was also an argument in that series about you didn't have to lose your loved one. They could have been cured if this technology was allowed, which is very true. In Strange New Worlds, there was a bit about an Illyrian, who is another group of people that modify themselves. And she was shown as being innocent for it. And they even showed a group of Illyrians who didn't survive because they tried to unmod themselves to fit in better with the Federation. And they paid the price for it. So now I'm going to give you some examples of writers that don't get it. So in the Discovery series, there was a scene where the cyber mods were talking about being proud of being augments. Now, augment, remember, in Star Trek is an insult to gene mods. Oh, you're just a filthy augment, right? So that completely ignored like the lore of the setting. And why are cyber mods so allowed, but gene mods not? When you're in a setting with rogue AI and Borg, they can just take over someone who has cyber mods if they have enough of them, potentially, get a virus into them. That's a real security risk that doesn't exist for gene mods. Another problem is when the engineer modifies himself to be able to use a spore drive. He almost gets arrested for this. If the spore drive wasn't so essential at the time, he would have been thrown in jail. Because they called it eugenics, which it was not. He wasn't forcing people to take on new traits. He wasn't weeding out traits he thought was bad. He wasn't doing anything of the sort. This conflation of genetic technology with eugenics is nonsense. It's like calling everyone who does chemical research a chemical weapons developer, or everyone who studies physics a nuclear weapons specialist. It's not the same thing. Yes, you can use one for the other, but in a Venn diagram, it would only overlap in the middle a little bit. Eugenics has been attempted with a lot of things that don't involve genetic technology, selective breeding, that sort of thing. It's a bad idea. It results in your species getting weaker, having less diversity, being less able to adapt to change. It is something only idiots do. There's a good reason it shouldn't be allowed. But there are many uses of genetic technology that do not involve forcing everyone to change in the same way or weeding out a trait from the entire population that you don't like. Which that's what we call on this channel FE is. It's forcing traits out, forcing traits in, forcing everyone to do the same thing. The engineer didn't do that. He did it for a utilitarian reason, and he saved a lot of lives doing it. And if they didn't need his ship, he would have been rotting in jail the rest of his life. I mean, I gave you many examples of modders who are not doing eugenics of any kind, forced or otherwise, with that village example, that story I told you. Not a one of them were eugenicists. Not a one. They weren't trying to force everyone to change. They weren't trying to weed out traits they thought were bad. And yet, the Federation would call them all that as an insult, as an excuse. I tell you. But Picard, season 1, is perhaps the worst offender. So a version of Android basically wreaks havoc on Mars, right? And as a result, the Federation makes all androids illegal. And Picard acts like this is unprecedented. Oh my gosh, they're just reacting. They're not thinking. Um, but this is exactly what they did with Gmods. One model was bad, very, very bad. They did things to the brain they shouldn't have done, and it resulted in insanity. And they were very powerful people. A bit unrealistic because you can't really augment like that. It's a trade-off. If you have a super brain, where's that energy coming from? In a malnourishment situation, you'd be the first to go with a brain like that. It's a trade-off. It's not really, you can't just enhance everything. That's not how it works. But that is how they reacted to Gmods. They're doing the exact same thing in that series to androids. And there's like no self-awareness. Picard is completely ignorant of the fact. And then there's even a line in it where one of the androids says, "You're committing preemptive genocide against us." Which is not entirely literal because they don't really have genes, but, well, maybe synthetic ones. But it is literal with the mods. One form of mod was bad, so all forms of mod were restricted. Now, to be fair, they are still allowed to exist in society. But as I said at the start, whenever you tell everyone that this group of people is lesser than, it's okay to kick down at this group of people, they're probably not safe. When the Ilarian in Strange New Worlds was found out, in one timeline, she ended up rotting away in a prison for the rest of her life, not allowed to contact the outside world, because she basically lied on her resume. They wouldn't treat a regular person like that. So yeah, they're very bigoted. They are default supremacists. And that's a problem. So if I were to write a character for Star Trek, this is what I do. I'd have someone who wanted to modify, became very different than they started. Maybe even ended up looking like a Cajun, even though that's not what they are, or something, like some significant modification, right? And they maybe even had kids that inherited their traits, some of their traits, because obviously only one of the parents had them. And they had to be on the run and protect their kids. And when their kids got old enough, they decided to join the Rangers because the Rangers were the only ones helping them. The Federation wouldn't help them. So, this character decides to repay the Rangers by becoming one of them. This character can no longer comprehend genetics enough to do any modding. When they modded themselves, they got a little dumber. And they can still do medicine, but they can't do anything that advanced. Like I said, modding's always a trade-off. So you're going to lose something when you gain something. So, and the quirk of the character would be, whenever someone asks the character why they did it, they would always deflect. They would never give a straight answer. Not because they don't know why they did it. They know why they did it. It's because they don't believe they owe anyone an answer. Every soul owns its body. And that's it. He doesn't owe anyone an answer. And I think that's right. So yeah, he doesn't owe anyone an answer. If a soul doesn't own its body, what even is a person? Right? Just a piece of property owned by some central authority. Your flesh, your blood, your bone, your marrow, all owned by someone else. If you're modifying yourself in a way that's directly harmful to others, like you're producing disease all around you or something, yeah, you owe an explanation. But if you're not forcing other people to do anything, come on, man. So yeah, I would write a character like that if I were to write a character. But anyway, it's good to see that the writers in some cases do push back on this and do recognize it as bigotry, even calling it as such sometimes. That's nice to see. And I don't know how to fix it at this point, because it's canon. It's too ingrained in the series. So at this point, I think the best thing to do would be more stories like the ones in Enterprise or Strange New Worlds that sort of sheds a light on that, a setting, the characters in a setting, the factions in a setting can be against something without the actual setting be against it. You know what I mean? There are plenty of settings where the main power, the main people in charge are the bad guys. You know, there's a lot of settings like that. And this is one in which they're not the bad guys in most ways, but they are a little bit in some ways. So, and the moral of this video is if you're making a far future spacefaring series, while modding wouldn't be common, most people wouldn't do it, it should exist as part of the world. Otherwise, you're having to create too many assumptions, connect too many dots. And I mean, how do you even enforce that like across a galaxy? It's kind of crazy. But anyway, no offense to Trekkies out there. I just thought this was something worth talking about. Thank you for listening. I've been ZJ. And remember, always gene more responsibly. Clicky, 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 clicky.